In today's video on Earth's biogeochemical cycles, I'll discuss how energy flows through the Earth's biosphere. We'll also talk about how essential elements like carbon, oxygen, nitrogen, and phosphorus cycle through the planet's biotic and abiotic spheres. Lastly, I'll talk about how human activity can disrupt or influence these natural processes. But first, let's define a biogeochemical cycle. These cycles are the movement of essential elements and compounds through the biological living, the geological earth, and chemical components of our planet. These cycles apply to the elements that are essential for life, such as carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, phosphorus, sulfur, and water. These biogeochemical cycles will help us explain how life's essential elements move through the Earth's four major systems. These systems are also called spheres. These include the biosphere, the geosphere, the atmosphere, and the hydrosphere. These spheres are categorized as being biotic, meaning living, or biotic, non-living. So for example, the biosphere. It's biotic. It includes all the living organisms, including humans. The geosphere is abiotic because it includes Earth's rocks, soil, minerals, and core. While living organisms can be found within the soil and rocks, the materials themselves are not alive. The atmosphere is abiotic also. It's composed of gases like oxygen, nitrogen, carbon dioxide, and water vapor. It contains no living organisms. The hydrosphere is also abiotic. It represents all the bodies of water, such as the oceans, lakes, rivers, glaciers, and groundwater. While life exists in water, water itself is non-living. Energy is needed to cycle life's essential elements through the Earth's four systems. That energy comes from the sun, and it's powering the biological and chemical processes, that is, the breaking and forming of chemical bonds. As energy moves through the ecosystems, unusable or wasted energy leaves the Earth in the form of heat. Note that the movement of energy is only in one direction. So let's look more closely at how energy is transferred among living organisms, with a focus on microorganisms. We're going to start with the producers. Producers are the plants, algae, and photosynthetic bacteria. They help convert energy from the sun, that is, light energy, into chemical energy through photosynthesis. They turn inorganic carbon dioxide into organic molecules such as carbohydrates. This stored energy is later turned into usable energy in the form of ATP during cellular respiration. Producers can also absorb other elements known as inorganic elements like nitrogen and sulfur to build upon their proteins and nucleotides. Consumers, they eat the producers, and other consumers, they break down organic molecules through cellular respiration, generating ATP and other organic molecules. Another form of consumers are those specifically known as the decomposers, such as the fungi and soil bacteria. They're going to break down dead organisms to recycle their elements, such as carbon and nitrogen, back into the environment to be reused by other living organisms. Without these decomposers, life's essential elements would remain locked in non-living matter, and their limited supplies would be soon depleted. During each of these transfers via chemical reactions, some energy is going to be lost in the form of heat. While much of the heat escapes into space, some will remain trapped by the greenhouse gases, contributing to our global warming. In summary, energy will flow through the Earth as an open system in one direction, but matter needs to recycle within the Earth's closed system within the four spheres. Before we go further into the biogeochemical cycles, we need to know a couple more terms, and that's the autotrophs and the heterotrophs. The producers that I mentioned are also known as autotrophs. Autotrophs by name convert inorganic carbon dioxide into carbohydrates by photosynthesis, and I'm giving the examples here. Whereas the heterotrophs are going to use organic molecules such as carbohydrates, proteins, and fats, and they will then break them down by cellular respiration, releasing carbon dioxide. And as mentioned earlier that the decomposers are a special form of consumers, they are also a special form of heterotrophs. They're going to recycle organic matter by digesting dead organisms and recycling their macromolecules. So keep these terms in mind and their definitions as I walk you through the biogeochemical cycles of some of life's essential elements. And I'm going to start with carbon. Carbon exists in all four Earth systems. Looking at the carbon distribution among the four spheres, the geosphere holds the largest amount of carbon found in rocks, sand, minerals, and fossil fuels. The biosphere holds the second largest amount, storing about 18 to 20% of carbon in animals and 40 to 50% in plants. The atmosphere contains very little carbon, mostly in the form of carbon dioxide and methane gas, while the hydrosphere holds the least amount of carbon, that is, dissolved carbon dioxide, bicarbonate ions, and carbonic acids. So the key takeaway point here is that carbon is unevenly distributed among the Earth's four spheres, with the geosphere and biosphere accounting for the majority of carbon found on Earth. With that, let's talk about how carbon cycles among these spheres, and I'll start with using the producers as the start point. Also remember that the producers are the autotrophs. Aquatic and land plants, algae and photosynthetic bacteria are going to use photosynthesis to convert carbon dioxide, sunlight, and water into oxygen and carbohydrates. This process is also called carbon fixation. It's called carbon fixation because it transforms inorganic carbon in the form of carbon dioxide into organic carbon molecules, in this case, carbohydrates. Heterotrophic consumers will get their energy in carbon by consuming producers or other consumers. In turn, they're going to release carbon dioxide during cellular respiration. That carbon dioxide re-enters the atmosphere and or the hydrosphere, making it available again for the autotrophs. So you can start to see the cycling between heterotrophs and autotrophs. As a natural part of life, all living organisms have a limited lifespan. The heterotrophic decomposers like bacteria, fungi, and protozoa, and nematodes, which are found in the soil and the aquatic environments, will help decompose these dead organisms by cellular respiration, releasing carbon back into the carbon cycle in the form of carbon dioxide. This is an example where, without decomposition, carbon would stay locked in these dead materials, and they would just end up by piling up. As carbon is released back into the atmosphere or into the food chain, new living organisms are born and grow, resulting in a continuous biogeochemical cycle of carbon among the living producers and consumers. Some bacteria will interact with carbon a little differently, though. These will be called the methanogenic bacteria, also known as methanogens, or the methanotrophic bacteria, also called methanotrophs. The methanogens are anaerobic microbes that will convert carbon dioxide into methane gas, whereas the methanotropes are aerobic and they're going to convert methane back into carbon dioxide. So you can almost see a side shoot of the major cycling of carbon. So these processes will be known respectively as methanation and flaring. Carbon cycles through the biogeochemical cycle at different rates. At times, it may slow down and form a reservoir where it appears to not cycle at all. This is where the fossil fuels come into play. They're a major carbon reservoir. Recall that fossil fuels and fossils are part of the Earth's geosphere, and it's the largest carbon reservoir found on Earth. It holds about 99.99% of Earth's carbon. These fossil fuels and fossils are the product of carbonization and fossilization. Carbonization is the process in which organic matter is converted into carbon or carbon-containing residues through the process of heat and pressure and leads to that formation of coal, charcoal, or fossil fuels. Whereas that of fossilization is a more natural process through which the remains of living organisms are preserved in the Earth's crust over a geological time and form these fossils. Both carbonization and fossilization are a form of carbon storage that locks carbon into that geosphere, whereas the only way for them to escape is by combustion, so burning fuels or biomass will release the carbon in the form of carbon dioxide. This is often through human activity or through volcanic eruptions. It's a lot of information, so I want you to focus on identifying these diagrams. So I can give you these pictures of the carbon biogeochemical cycle. I'd like you to focus on or identify and explain photosynthesis, which is also carbon fixation, cellular respiration, decomposition, carbonization, fossilization, flaring, and methanation. I'll include this figure in your lecture notes as an alternative way of representing the biogeochemical cycles. It's just a lot of less noise. It's more of a graph type form. So let's move on to the oxygen biogeochemical cycle. Like carbon, oxygen is found in the four spheres, with the majority located in the biosphere, aka the living organisms. That's where it's different from that of carbon. Remember, the majority of carbon was in the geosphere. The oxygen cycle will closely follow that of carbon since it's required for aerobic cellular respiration and for the production of oxygen during photosynthesis. As I did with carbon cycle, I'm going to begin the oxygen cycle through the process of photosynthesis. Plants, algae, and cyanobacteria, which are photosynthetic bacteria, will use the sun's light energy to convert carbon dioxide and water to produce glucose and release oxygen as a bioproduct. Decomposers, such as bacteria and fungi, again part of the biosphere, will break down dead organisms, consuming oxygen gas and releasing carbon dioxide and water. Combustion, again, as mentioned with carbon, is the burning of fossil fuels or fossil biomass, the abiotic geosphere. It uses oxygen and releases carbon dioxide, water vapor, and heat. Dissolved oxygen is found in water. This oxygen will enter the water and it's used by the aquatic organisms, again, the biotic biosphere found in water for cellular respiration. Oxygen moves between the Earth's four spheres, the atmosphere, the hydrosphere, the biosphere, and the geosphere, interacting with the carbon in water. We're not going to mention the water cycle here. It does help support life and it drives energy production, and it's essential to chemical weathering. So with that, let's go to the next cycle, and that is that of nitrogen. Nitrogen is primarily found in the atmosphere, where it makes up about 78% by dry weight. Smaller amounts are present in the biosphere, while only trace levels exist in the geosphere, roughly about 0.002%, and in the hydrosphere. Even though living organisms account for approximately 3 to 5% of nitrogen, it's an essential element needed to form our amino acids, which make up our proteins, and our nucleotides, which make up our RNA, DNA, and ATP. However, most organisms can't use atmospheric nitrogen gas directly. It has to be converted into a usable form before we can take it into our macromolecules. One of the key players in the nitrogen cycles are that of the bacteria that are capable of converting that nitrogen gas into a usable form. That process is called nitrogen fixation. It's a process of converting atmospheric nitrogen to ammonia. An example is that of the rhizomes. Rhizomes are a symbiotic bacteria that live in the root nodules of legumes such as beans, peas, and clover. These are found in the soil. Whereas cyanobacteria in water would do the same. So you have both in the aquatic and in the land. Legumes can use nitrogen in the form of ammonia to build amino acids and nucleotides. In return, the bacteria receives energy-rich carbohydrates from the plants, forming that mutualistic relationship. Some nitrogen-fixating bacteria are free-living. That means they're not symbiotic. So they're going to be living in the soil away from these root nodules. They're going to exist independently in the soil or water without forming these partnerships with plants or other organisms. Other soil bacteria will convert ammonia into nitrites, then to nitrates. This process is called nitrification. Plants other than legumes, such as corn, are going to rely on nitrates as their usable source of nitrogen for their DNA, RNA, ATP, and amino acids. The process by which these plants, whether they are corn or legumes, the process in which they use to absorb the ammonia or the nitrates to incorporate them into their organic molecules is called assimilation. Besides that, the soil is also teeming with various microorganisms. As these organisms metabolize and give off waste products, other organisms will take them in as their nutrients. Thus, we're going to convert nitrogen into different forms. Some of these conversions will take nitrites and nitrates and convert them back to nitrous oxide, or nitrogen gas, by the reverse process known as denitrification, which is then released into the atmosphere, completing the nitrogen cycle. The last process in the nitrogen cycle is ammonification. This occurs when the decomposers, such as our saprophytic bacteria and fungi, will break down nitrogen-containing organic matter from dead plants and animals and release the ammonia back into the soil. This ammonia can then re-enter the cycle through the nitrification process. Animals, including the herbivores and carnivores, which are the consumers and heterotrophs, will get their nitrogen by eating plants or other animals. When they die, the decomposers will break down their own tissues, returning the nitrogen back to the soil in the form of ammonia and then returning it back into the food chain. Again, I'm going to include this slide in your notes to help you when you study the nitrogen cycle. Next is the phosphorus cycle. Phosphorus is going to move through the geosphere, which is the rocks in the soil, the biosphere, the living things, living organisms, and the hydrosphere, water. But unlike the other major cycles like carbon, nitrogen, and oxygen, the phosphorus cycle does not involve the atmosphere, because phosphorus rarely exists as a gas under natural conditions. Phosphorus is a limiting nutrient in many ecosystems. It's essential, but often in only short supplies. It's going to support plant growth, energy transfer, such as ATP, and the genetic material. An imbalance or too much of phosphorus from fertilizers would lead to excessive algal growth, known as algal blooms, and which would result in the depletion of oxygen in water, ultimately leading to eutrophication. The 6 processes in the phosphorus cycle are as follows. The first one is weathering. Phosphorus is stored in rocks and sediments as phosphate minerals, such as calcium phosphate. Over time, weathering and erosion are going to release this inorganic phosphate into the soil and the water. Next is absorption. Plants will absorb inorganic phosphate from the soil through their roots. Phosphorus is essential for the building of DNA, RNA, ATP, and cell membranes. The next process is the food chain. Animals will obtain their phosphorus by eating plants or other animals. Phosphorus will move through the food web as organisms consume and are being consumed. Decomposition. When organisms die or excrete waste, decomposers, such as the saprophytic bacteria and fungi again, will break down their organic material. This then returns the organic phosphates to the soil or water as inorganic phosphates. Sedimentation. Sedimentation will occur when phosphorus will enter the lakes, rivers, and oceans and settle and form phosphate-rich sediments. An uplift. Over millions of years, these sediments that have settled in the oceans and waters can eventually be uplifted in the form of new rock, restarting the cycle all over again. So let's quickly review what was covered in this video. We mentioned that the biogeochemical cycles describe how key elements such as carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, and phosphorus move through the Earth's 4 major systems, and they're listed here. These systems are categorized as the biotic and abiotic. Energy from the sun drives this movement of these elements throughout their cycles, and the producers will convert sunlight into chemical energy by photosynthesis, storing it in organic molecules, where the consumers eat the producers to obtain the energy, while decomposers break down dead organisms, returning the nutrients back to the environment. While energy flows in one direction, eventually leaving the Earth as heat, matter is continuously recycled within the Earth's system. In closing, I'm including the next couple of slides just to summarize the impact that microbes have on the biogeochemical cycles presented here in this lecture on the left, and comparing to what the impact of humans have presented here on the right of each slide. Notice that humans are consumers and heterotrophs. So because of that, we have a major positive impact on the cycle, just like what we've mentioned for the microbes throughout this lecture. But humans being humans, we also have the ability to disrupt the cycles in a negative way and the ability to fix them. So I'm just going to cycle through these pages, and I'm going to include them in your handouts so that they help you study for the exams. So in short, microbes sustain and balance the Earth's life-supporting cycles. While humans will play a role as heterotrophs, we can both disrupt and restore them. With that, I conclude my lecture on biogeochemical cycles.